Hi there, and welcome to game number 10 of the World Championship match between Carlsen and Anand being played in Sochi, Russia. This game was played on Friday the 21st of November 2014, and being game number 10, we can't help but think back to a year ago that it was in the 10th game that Carlsen sealed his World Championship title, having won 3 games in that match without losing one. This match so far we've seen 3 decisive games, but Carlsen has won 2 of them and Anand has won 1 of them. So this means that going into this match after 9 games, Carlsen's lead was 5 games to 4, which is by no means a decisive lead. And one of the things that Kasparov has even mentioned is that the last thing Carlsen can afford to do here is to be getting complacent, considering the fact that he only has a 1-game lead, and Anand will be having the advantage of the white pieces in the final game should it come down to that. But without further ado, let's get stuck into this game, which was Anand with the white pieces and Carlsen with black. And as in all his other white games so far this match, Anand opened with d4, which Carlsen continued with knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, bishop g7, queen b3, which means that we do have the Russian system of the Grunfeld defense in action, and Anand chooses what can be arguably described as one of the sharpest lines that you can possibly use for meeting the Grunfeld. And with Anand that needs to start scoring full points desperately quickly in this match, the queen b3 Grunfeld is possibly his best option to use here, because he really needs to attack the Grunfeld with gusto and not allow Carlsen to get into any of his normally quiet positional building type of structures in which he does so well. Game continued with d takes c4, queen takes c4, castles, e4, and now here Carlsen had a short bit of a think, about a minute and a half or so, and actually no correction, it was about a 22-second think. And then he came back with knight a6, and I saw various comments flying around the Twitter sphere at the time that what is Carlsen thinking? Everybody and his auntie knows that you play a6 in this type of position. But then again, not everybody in his auntie has Carlsen's ELO rating. So before writing off moves that Carlsen plays in the opening, one must clearly bear in mind that the rest of us have a rating decidedly different to that of Carlsen. The game continued with bishop e2, c5, but here I can say that these type of moves and type of positions, it's definitely nothing really new and unusual. Everything has been played a good number of times at top level, and now we go into a fairly forced combination that has been played a good number of times with d5, e6, castle short, e takes d5, e takes d5. So we've got effectively, yes, both sides still have a bishop to develop, but we've effectively gotten through to the, we can just about say, the end of the opening phase of the game, and we've now reached the position that has been a battleground for the Greenfield defense more or less since its inception. Black has two main choices that lead to somewhat different games. Normally, Black is hoping to blockade that strong d5 pawn, while retaining his piece activity. The main danger is if that pawn advances in an unchecked fashion. But then again, he also has to make sure that his a6 knight returns to the game successfully at some point, because at the moment that a6 knight is really not doing really much at all, besides possibly giving some sort of protection to the c5 pawn, but at the same time it needs to really get into the game quickly. The game continued with Carlsen centralizing his rook, and here in this position Anand uncorked bishop g5. So in this position we have to make the assumption that Carlsen's team must have been looking at the players that made up Anand's support team and the players that were giving him advice as his seconds in the match, to determine which variation of the Greenfield might occur. So which means that there was no ways that they would have missed this particular move being uncorked in the Greenfield. And that is despite the fact that it's obviously somewhat of an unusual move, and because there's 4 moves in the Greenfield that have been played more often than this one, but still we very much still following established opening theory. For instance, there's the game between Wachazek and Ponomaryov that the players are currently following in this at this point. So everything that we're playing at the moment has been done before, and we continue with h6, bishop back to e3, and so which means that the bishop sortie out to g5. It simply had the situation of slightly weakening Black's fianchettoed kingside bishop pawn structure that could be a useful target to attack as the game progresses. And here we continue with bishop f5, rook a1, and knight e4. And so this is the move that you have to be assuming would be Black's improvement on Ponomaryov's game in the game that I mentioned just before. White is at this point, it's interesting for White. He has to advance his d-pawn to be able to make progress, because the advancing of that d-pawn is effectively his strength within this position. And he has many ways of doing so. Effectively, he has 3 choices. He can advance it immediately, which looks risky and something that Carlsen obviously must have prepared for. Or, for example, he can play knight b5, and push the pawn later, or for that matter, he could trade knights on e4 first and then push the pawn. So those are his effective three moves that he has to, or three options that he has, as far as either pushing the pawn immediately or doing some sort of support as far as pushing the pawn is concerned. But in the game itself, Anand made the choice of, before I get into that, for instance, if he pushes a pawn directly, then all that, and Carlsen had to take the pawn straight away. That would just lead to the position of queen f4, bishop f8, bishop takes a6, b takes a6, bishop takes c5, and that would be an absolutely dismal position for black to have to defend. So but Anand went for knight e4. Obviously bishop takes e4, changing back, and queen c1. So now here's the situation where black doesn't really have the time at his disposal to be able to adequately defend that threat on h6, because but his counterplay that he has both against d5 and b2 will allow him to retain at least the semblance of a material balance. And here Carlsen continued with queen f6. With bishop takes a6, h6 should I say, and Carlsen came back with queen takes b2. For instance, instead of playing queen takes b2, Carlsen could have recaptured material by playing bishop takes d5, for instance, which then would allow rook takes d5, rook takes e2, rook d7, queen b2, bishop g7, queen c1, rook takes c1 and queen takes g7, and then rook takes b7, and the position will then still be fairly unpleasant, primarily because of the fact that f7 is not really easily defended, and the black knight out here on a6 since the opening is still completely out of the game. But that would be able to continue with, say, rook takes a2, knight e5, rook f8, rook takes a7, knight b4, rook takes a2, knight takes a2, rook takes c5. But because of black's completely passive position, the hold that he has on his defense is not incredibly obvious, and would require incredibly active play, because here white would have the 3 versus 2 pawns on the king side. His rook and knight are working well together and active, whereas black's rook is pegged back down into a defensive role, and the black knight has moved from its perch on a6, where it was completely out of the game, down to a perch down on a2, where it is still completely out of the game. So, getting back to the position, Carlsen played queen d2, and interestingly enough, Anand exchanged queens, which means that with the queens off the board, the pawn on d5 can now be much more easily attacked with one of black's rooks. But then, on the other hand, white has now gotten rid of the weakness that he had on d2. So, overall, at the moment, we have to say that white still has really serious chances of winning the game here. And knight g5 is played, which is very much a logical move to play in this type of position. Continued with bishop d4, knight takes e4, rook takes e4, bishop f3, rook e7, d6, rook d7, bishop f4. Now, we have to say that where they're positioned on the board, white's bishop pair is incredibly strong, but there's also this d4 square that is looking really useful for black. There's no question that black at the moment is really trying to claw back into positional equality, and he's still far from being able to gain that. The ball is definitely in white's court, and now he has to make a really strong attempt to break down white's defenses. If I can remember back to reading the basic premises of Steinitz's laws of chess, is that it is only the attacker that wins at chess, and it is the prerogative of the player with the better position, the player with the initiative, to attack. Because if that player that has the initiative does not do the attacking, then he stands the chance of losing that initiative, losing that advantage, and then it becomes his opponent that will have the stronger position and will have the prerogative to attack. And conversely, it's obviously the player with the weaker position, which in this case is Carlsen, that has the prerogative of needing to defend. And here Carlsen comes back with knight b4. For instance, bringing the knight back to c6 would have finished his defensive setup, and then he could have waited to start seeing what Anand planned to do, but instead he plays the more attacking knight d4. And again, rook d2 for Anand, and rook e8 for Carlsen, snapping up control of the vacant e-file is a really nice choice. And it's although by no means equal, it's no longer easy for white to keep on improving his position. At some stage, he's going to be needing to give up on one of these two bishops in order to be able to go into a slightly better endgame. We continued with rook c1, rook e6, h4, bishop e5, and here again Carlsen comes up with a fairly cunning resource. White still retains some advantage, but it's now no longer easy for Anand to be able to follow through and get his attack rolling. He's waited too long and has allowed Carlsen to be able to re-establish a strong defensive setup. And as I mentioned earlier, that Anand needing to give up his bishop pair in order to be able to get a stronger endgame, and that's exactly what he does in this position by playing bishop takes e5, rook takes e5, and here Anand plays bishop takes on b7, which all this effectively does is allow Carlsen to simplify the position down into an effectively drawn endgame, which suits Carlsen down to the ground because that just neutralizes Anand's second last game with the white pieces, and that's exactly what we continue doing with rook takes b7, d7, knight c6. But having the option to be able to play knight c6 at this point is an incredible useful resource for Carlsen, because he catches the pawn right on time and white has no hope of winning the double rook endgame. So Anand continues with queening the pawn, knight takes d8, rook takes d8 check, king goes to g7, and rook d2. And in this position, after playing rook d2, realizing that the double rook endgame with black, having a double rook endgame in one in which black is the player sitting with the passed pawn in the under the current structure, meaning that it's a position that black has absolutely no way of, that white has absolutely no way of winning. It was in this position that Anand extended his hand across the board, offering the draw, which Carlsen accepted, which neutralizes Anand's second last white game. So after 10 games, we've got Carlsen with 5.5, Anand with 4.5. A rest day tomorrow, and we'll be seeing Carlsen coming out with his last white game of the match on Sunday. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the game, Kasparov said that the last thing that Carlsen can afford to do is become complacent, because it still is possible for Anand to claw his way back into the match and take the entire match off into the rapid playoffs. So that's how the game ended on move 32 with the draw. And please click the thumbs up like button just below this video screen, share this out amongst your chess friends, and while you're about it, down below the left hand corner of the video screen is a huge big red subscribe button. Hit that as well, that way you can stay subscribed to my channel and be kept up to date on all the games of this match that I will be commenting on through until its conclusion, and beyond that with the next exciting Grandmaster tournaments, top level Grandmaster tournaments that will be coming up through until the end of the year and into next year as well. Stay carved up for the win. I'll be seeing you next time. Cheers.